Graphing sine and cosine. So I want to kind of remind you of what you did with the unit circle and kind of transfer that into what we've done over the past couple days, or the work with the Ferris wheel. So I want you to think about like this as being a Ferris wheel, and it's the unit circle. And this is 0. And when you get up here, pi over 2. And over here is pi. Down here is 3 pi over 2. Remember when we were going through this that the sine really was the vertical, because we started with not having an opposite side. So at 0, we haven't gone left and right. Get up to here, and we're up at 1. Get over to here, we're back at 0. Go down to here, we're down at -1. And come back around, we're back at 0. So kind of like the Ferris wheel, we're starting here at 0 degrees or 0 radians, and we're going to go up to 1, back down to 0, down to -1, back around to 0. And similar to what we drew with the Ferris wheel, is we're going to draw the sine graph based on this same kind of thing. So what I mean by that is, if I had the equation y equals the sine of x, when I graph that, what I want to think about is I got this vertical and I got the horizontal, and this is really what I would call the angle. So we'll go all the way out to 2 pi. Halfway through is pi. Halfway through that is pi over 2. And midway in between pi and 2 pi is 3 pi over 2. Just like in the circle drawing. The highest we go is 1. The lowest we go is -1. So here's what it looks like. When we think about how this looks, we start at 0, because we haven't gone to the left or the right over here on this drawing up here. So we start at 0. At pi over 2, sine goes up to 1. At pi, we're back at 0. 3 pi over 2, we're down at -1. And 2 pi, we're back at 0. If we create this smooth curve I kind of talked about when we were doing the Ferris wheel problem, one period of this curve goes over to there, and then it would repeat, right? One period would look like that, and then it would repeat. So if you think about this curve being what you would term as periodic, the period, or how much it takes to repeat, is 2 pi. The amplitude, or how high it goes or how low it goes, is just 1. The midline, which is the middle of this particular one, is the equation y equals 0, because we haven't gone up or down, because this is still the x-axis, this is still the y-axis, so the midline is right there. So when I think about each of these pieces, if I highlighted the midline on this one is right there, midway through. If I highlighted the period is 2 pi, because it repeats every 2 pi. The amplitude, which we're going to call this, that's the amplitude. So that's the very general characteristics of a sine graph. Now we're going to look at the cosine graph. We're going to do the exact same thing, but we got to think about the cosine graph in a little different way. So I'm going to go back up to the Ferris wheel and I'm going to do some stuff in a green color. If you think about the cosine was really left and right because that dealt with the adjacent. Notice that the cosine is 1 here, -1 here. So the cosine starts here at 1. The cosine goes up to here, and you haven't gone left or right, so that's 0. When you get back to here, the cosine is -1. When you get down to here, the cosine is back at 0. And then if you get back to that starting value, the cosine is equal to 1. If we graph that similar to this, here's what it would look like. We got an x-axis or y-axis, right? That's the y-axis. And we got an x-axis. So that's the x-axis. That's also what I would maybe refer to as the angle. The highest we go is 1. The lowest we go is -1. 1 period to get back to the start is 2 pi. Midway is pi. Midway between that, pi over 2. Midway between this, 3 pi over 2. Now, if we think about what this looks like, if we are going to graph y is equal to the cosine of x, the parent function of cosine starts at 1. Then it goes to 0. Then cosine goes down to -1. Cosine goes back to 0. And then cosine finishes back there at 1. So if you draw that graph, it goes down here, right down here, up here, and right there. And then that repeats. So when we think about the period and all the things over here, the period on this one, which is how long it takes to repeat, is 2 pi. Okay, so if you think about the period, that's the period. It takes 2 pi to repeat. If we take a look at the amplitude on this is equal to 1. Remember that the amplitude, if we think about the amplitude is how high it gets away from that midline. Okay, so that's the amplitude. If we look at the last thing, which is the midline on this one, again, is y equals 0, because midway through is right here. It kind of splits it right in the middle. So if you're going to define these things, so if I'm going to define each of these things, the midline is the middle horizontal line of the graph. The equation is always y equals some number. That's what the midline is. The amplitude is the highest movement, I'm going to call it. Some physics teachers would call it displacement, movement from the midline. So how high up from the midline we went. The period is the length of x values it takes to make one cycle. Hopefully that helps. I'll come back and do a couple of examples.